I have a question for you, Richard. I wonder if you have an opinion about why there's been a six-fold increase in this kind of investment in military. Why are we seeing this shift over to military? I mean, we know that war is big business. It always has been. But why is it bigger business now? What's going on, and at what level are these policies being made? Because I find that shocking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a couple of different questions there. But first, I want to clarify that six-fold increase was just to those two particular companies. There's a lot. When I did most of the research into this, like when most of the research that I did into this, most intensively anyway, was a few years back, and at that time I found hundreds of companies, including like 16 of the top 20 global weapons makers. So that six-fold increase, I don't know whether that's true for generally or whether that was just true for those two. Boeing and the other one.
Okay.
Lockheed Martin.
But
the other question that you asked was, I think what you asked was how are these decisions made about where to invest our money? I mean, was that part of your question?
Yes, and are you seeing a shift towards more and more of a military, more and more support for the military in Canada? Is it showing up? It sounds like it's showing up in your research. And where is that support coming from?
Yeah. Well, the investments, the CPP investments, are made by a board which is supposedly at arm's length from the government. The whole investment board, the CPP investment board, was set up by Parliament, and it's supposed to be operating at arm's length from the government. But I mean, they're investing our money, and they invest in all sorts of horrible things, as I've mentioned. Even tobacco companies. It's totally contradictory in some ways to, you've got the government saying, we need to reduce the number of smokers in the country, et cetera, and then they have their investment board investing our money, in the biggest tobacco companies. And then the government stands up and says it stands for peace and human rights, and it invests in the world's largest weapons manufacturers. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, weapons manufacturers are always a very profitable bunch of companies to invest in, and the CPP investment board says, well, the rules governing our existence say that we're supposed to invest in the most profitable things. And that's all we're supposed to care about. It's just making money. So they say that, ethical, moral issues are of no significance whatsoever. They're not supposed to. They're by law, by the mandate that by their conditions that they were given for their existence. They're not supposed to look at those things. They're just supposed to make as much money as they can for us.
Just to point out, that's what big unions have done too. The Canadian Union of Public Employees, I believe. There's many big unions that have fallen prey to the same misdirected funds.
Yeah.
And people are waking up. I think that there is this Conscience Canada is a great way to maybe redirect it. But if we bring the attention to this, so are you educating people on your side of the country? Are you giving talks and?
Well, I'm trying my best. We are trying our best. And one thing that's, we have a magazine, Press for Conversion, and our website also has a lot of information. And we actually do education across the country. We're not just focused.
Can you tell us your website again?
Yeah, well, the best way to find it, the name of the organization is Coalition to Oppose the Arms Trade. But that's a bit of a mouthful, so it's hard for people to remember. And our website address is a little bit complicated. It's coat.ncf.ca. So what I tell people is just Google COAT, like COAT. If you Google COAT, then Coalition to Oppose the Arms Trade comes up right at the top. But we have a magazine called Press for Conversion, and each issue of that magazine deals with a different anti-war theme. And the next issue is going to be about a big, Canada's largest weapons bazaar that's coming to Ottawa, and it's also going to look at Canadian military exports to Israel, and Canadian complicity in the war in Iraq, because people don't realize that Canada, from the very beginning of the war, in fact, from before the beginning of the war, the planning stages of the war. Canada was very involved and has been very involved right through in the war in Iraq, even though the Liberals made major propaganda about how they stood up to the Americans and decided not to go to war. But I've put together a list of about 20 pretty significant ways in which Canada is very deeply involved in the war in Iraq and has been from the beginning.
2006, quickly for our listening audience, this is going to be the last point. I'm going to quickly ask you a question. But in 2006, Lockheed Martin became involved with the census that went through Canada. Basically, Sandra Finley is one person who has refused to sign it, and she's gone to court. I'm not sure what the outcome is so far. But what happens is that you're seeing Lockheed Martin starting to get involved in Canada, and Canada is starting to turn, even with the signing of that the military agreement pact with the United States, you're starting to see Canada being used as nothing more, as I classify it, as leaf in space. So could you give a list of basically different political parties who have received contributions to their basically their coffers by certain weapons of mass destruction companies?
Well, that would take a while to go through the list.
Well, just basically the top ones.
But basically, and now the rules about donations to political parties has changed the last couple of years. So corporations can't give money to political parties anymore. But now, which actually makes it a little bit more difficult to track, because what happens is now that the executives from these companies donate money, and it's much harder to track where the political parties are getting their money from. But in short, for decades, the Liberals and Conservatives have been receiving millions of dollars a year from military industries in Canada, and the NDP hasn't, and the Bloc has not, but the Conservative Party, or previously known as the Reform and previously the Progressive Conservative Party, and the Liberals have all received money from these military companies, and usually the military companies give to both the Liberals and the Conservatives. They're happy to have either one in, the Liberals or the Conservatives. They both do the bidding of the military companies and the big corporations. They're both about the same, really.
And are these corporations that are operating in Canada, or are they outside Canada? Would they, to give donations, they'd have
Canadian
to be inside Canadian? And could you name a couple of them, a few of them?
Yeah, sure. And a lot of them are U.S. owned.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, for example, there's a big one in Montreal called CAE Electronics, and there's Canadian Marconi. It's now called CMC. There's, I'll say some of the big ones. BAE Systems Canada, Bell Helicopter Textron Canada, Boeing Canada, Bristol Aerospace, which I mentioned earlier, makes those warheads. Some of them have cluster bombs in them. Again, on the website, there's lists of hundreds of these things and exactly how much money they gave to the different parties over the years. I'm trying to look through my tables here. Donors to Canadian political parties. Okay, the biggest contractors that gave money to, I have a table in front of me from between 1993 and 2002. Bombardier gave about $900,000 to the Liberals and about $335,000 to the Conservatives and $120,000 to Reform. And CNC Lavalin, which is another big, it's a big engineering company. Oh, another thing I should point out is that these companies for the most part, they don't just restrict themselves just to military production. They often will make military hardware or provide military services for military equipment, but they may also do other things as well. Magna International was another big donor. So Bombardier, SNC, which at that time was actually had a branch of its one of its subsidiaries made ammunition, which was sold to the U.S. for use in the war in Iraq.
Well, I hate to cut you off there, Richard,
Yeah.
but what happens is that we're running out of time.
Sure.
So we only have about 30 seconds left. Can you basically give your email address so people can contact you? And just once again, give your website address, as Molly asked for it earlier. If you could give it again, that way people can, our listening audience can tune into your website and get information that we're not able to cover right now.
Sure, there's a ton of information in there because it goes back years of back issues of our magazine covering all sorts of topics. So to find our website, you just Google COAT, C-O-A-T, and you'll find Coalition to Oppose the Arms Trade. And my email is overcoat@rogers.com.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. That was Richard Saunders. This Co-op Radio 102.7 FM, CFRO. You've been listening to Hidden from History. I am the guest host for today, Reginald Angus Argue. Also had Ann Diamond here, and we had Sue, and hopefully we're going to have Sue again next week to talk further about her experience during the residential school, what she went through, and until next week, we say to the listening audience, have a great week.